Please extend another warm welcome to first-time DynamicsCon speaker, Kyle Lidberg. Today he'll be presenting his session, What is a 360-degree view of a customer anyway? Please stick around after Kyle's session for a live Q&A.
Thank you all for the time and attention on such an action-packed day. I'm Kyle Lidberg, and I wanted to thank you for joining me on this exploration of the elusive 360-degree view. What is it anyway? As a quick disclosure, I do work at Microsoft. I am a technical salesperson, and I regularly help marketing and sales leaders understand how our customer engagement apps can support their growth and retention initiatives. The topics today and thoughts explored are my own and do not officially represent Microsoft's stance, vision, or other perspectives as a whole. I wrote this quote down one time in a meeting in 2021, and it stuck out so much that I actually wrote it down on a sticky note at my desk. Customer expectations continue to increase, but their patience continues to decrease. And now I regularly think about this quote when I get frustrated that my burrito order was 20 minutes late, and when I got home, I noticed it wasn't even accurate. They added the wrong items to my order. Now, a burrito order might sound simple to fulfill, but there are numerous people involved in the planning and fulfillment of that order. It really takes a unified team to get something like this done. At Microsoft, they've been striving to deliver applications to support this team effort so that each customer interaction feels personalized and relevant to them. But I want to acknowledge that a 360-degree view of a customer varies from industry to industry, company to company, job role to job role, and customer to customer. But the common theme that I see is that there's a desire to have data related to a human in one accessible place. Many of the sales and marketing and service leaders that I've spoken with all say that they want all customer-related data available at their fingertips. But that data spans a lot of different use cases, categories, and interaction types. And I don't know about you, but I'm pretty inconsistent in how I write down my notes, the thoughts that I have, or the ways that I even capture information. My personal attempts at storing messy handwritten words in paper-backed notebooks does no one good on my team, or does good to anyone across the organization. But in companies and organizations, there are other kinds of point systems and databases scattered everywhere that are just as inconsistent as my handwritten notes. Luckily, with Dynamics 365 and its shared data layer with Dataverse, there's one single contact for the human that's shared across all the business departments, from email marketing to sales to service. So each digital interaction that the human had with your team is essentially stored and visible as a chronological timeline and organized into various tabs on the contacts form. This way, any coworker who engages with that known customer can provide a relevant interaction and a personalized experience. As we can see in this example, there are organized tabs across the top to visualize and interact with the history that this person has with your company. And there's a timeline that shows the last digital interaction that they had with your team. And in this example, it happens to be marketing emails that were sent from customer insights journeys. But is this enough data to say that, yes, I have a 360-degree view? Where does one actually decide that yes or no, this is enough or this is not enough to understand who this individual is? Because there might be a different definition of 360 degrees at the account level. Like maybe you want to see multiple contacts and their experiences all rolled up to the greater company or to the client. What if there are some interactions where you might not know where you're interacting with them, or even know who the person actually is because they're an unknown person, just like a digital advertisement. An unknown visitor might be somebody that's visiting your website from a Google or a Bing search. They land on your website, and they're starting to look for more information about your organization. Maybe the marketing team has interacted with this human via advertisements on Facebook or Snapchat, Instagram, LinkedIn, or other advertising methods. How can an organization now utilize those interactions and engagements with humans, but also match that up with the known contacts that they already have within Dynamics 365? This way, the marketing team can avoid advertising to people with open support tickets and cases, because why are you going to ask them for more money if they're already frustrated with you? So what is a 360-degree view, and what does it actually mean? Because in my mind, a holistic view of a B2C customer in retail or credit unions is going to be different than a holistic view of a B2B distributor, right? I had several conversations last week where a person stated they needed a customer data platform to bring all their data together into one place. And I asked, a handful of questions to start to clarify, what does that actually mean? Like, what kind of data do you actually desire? To where they quickly replied, just all of it. Just give me all of the data. I need all of it associated back to this individual. And in my analytical and nerdy brain, it actually just didn't make sense. Like, it still felt like, well, all is all, but what does all actually mean? So I asked a couple questions, trying to piece things together and starting to understand, where might this data actually come from? Like, what are they working with today? And honestly, the conversation spilled and sprawled and grew and grew. We're talking lists from this other team, to service records from this custom-built database, to messages stored within Teams, to invoice copies being sent out from an ERP, to a series of SharePoint lists and data feeds, and the good old trusty spreadsheets that are stored and shared across multiple departments. I always find it funny, as it always comes back to Excel at the end of the day. I think it's the world's most powerful CRM, in a joking way, but at the end of the day, sales reps, they probably have $1,000 some worth of software licenses associated to them every month that is just available at their fingertips. But they still rely on the tribal consensus of, this Excel document is the source of truth. It has all the data from all the other places together stored into one place. And I just always find that comical that Excel always ends up being that common denominator. But I say all this as I don't think there's a real consensus of what data is truly relevant, pertinent, timely, or needed to actually create a 360-degree view of a customer. I don't believe there's a North Star or best practice that spans across industries, companies, departments, or teams. I do, however, think that there are some common themes of data that are worthwhile. When I think about data that's worth capturing and storing, it spans across 5 different categories, and I'll start with identifiable information. Identifiable information helps one understand who they are, such as someone's name, their birth date, their email address, their physical address, phone number, job title, device ID, cookie ID, and more. These are details that can help describe who an individual might be on paper, or, well, I guess on paper, right? But who this individual might be as a whole. You can identify someone based on these different kinds of characteristics. Then there are behavioral events to consider. These are the time-related pieces of information that can be put into a chronological timeline, such as a phone call history, policy or subscription start and end dates. It is something that happened at a specific point in time, right? Then there's a way that we can start to make sense of these chronological activities that happened in time. And that's where I start to think about like calculated metrics to make a sense of all of this. Maybe it's a calculation of how long the customer has been a customer. Maybe it's a calculation of how engaged they are with your organization across the different lines of businesses. Like, how many open cases do they have? How many sales orders have they had? How many quotes do they have with you, but have never actually followed through on? It's like, where in the life cycle are they dropping off? But you can make other kinds of calculations as well, and we'll dig into that in a little bit. But we're in this era of privacy and consent following GDPR, right? There's a lot of GDPR best practices out there, and we have a way to help maintain the consent management. How has the person explicitly given you permission to interact with them, collect data about them, and more? I'll say that if a company or a brand were to reach out to me over SMS as a way to prospect or sell something to me, I'm actually going to immediately report it as junk. I don't want to text a salesperson throughout my buying journey. Let's just set up 20-30 minutes to chat versus wasting hours of back and forth texting throughout the course of weeks. But as I say something controversial like this, it's important for a company to know how many customers of theirs fall underneath similar behaviors or similar preferences. Maybe they have specific preferences of how they want to engage. Maybe it's the day of the week or by device type. Maybe they want to group people together based on their engagement behaviors. Do they typically only interact with the website, or do they typically call in to engage with us? What are those common means of communication that they prefer? Maybe we want to understand things like the purchase behaviors or the lifetime of a customer length. How old and how long of time do customers typically stay with your organization? And maybe even what is the value of that person to your organization? How much money have they spent over time, and what are the predictions of how much more there is to spend with you? So in order for companies to provide one-to-one personalization during every interaction, they need to group these individuals into customer personas and customer types. Companies need to know the similarities and the differences between customers so that they can cater that personalized experience to them in groups, subgroups, and in real time. For example, Microsoft refers to these groupings as personas and personas as segments. So we can see that Kyle is a homeowner with an active home policy with us. Due to him being a customer for the past 5 years, he's considered a member of our gold loyalty tier. He used to have a boat policy with us, so he may no longer have a boat, or he works with another broker. So that's another point of conversation to be had with them. But we can also see that he resides as the group of people that live in North Dakota. That's a lot of intelligence and intel to have at one's fingertips for when Kyle interacts with an employee or a marketing communication with that company. So where could all this data actually come from? I mentioned the collection of sources just a couple minutes ago, but as we start to roll up the sleeves and think, how do I get started on this quest of a 360-degree view? For those of you that are already using some elements of Dynamics 365 in one way or another, I think it might be easier to get started than one might think. The identifiable part is the contact record. The time-based timeline is captured in ways like activities, emails, phone calls, appointments, leads, quotes, orders. The metrics are essentially calculated in roll-up columns, and consent is captured in two different ways with communication preferences on the contact or the contact point preferences in real-time marketing. But insights, that's the tricky one. That's where I start to think of the power of customer insights data, because the insights is the main driver for why I would want to consider a customer data platform and build upon the existing Dynamics 365 investments. For example, within Dynamics 365 customer insights data, there's a way to easily calculate metrics and measures for your customer base, like the average transaction value, the total lifetime spend. How many interactions have they had with you and your brand over the last period of time, or in their lifetime, or the customer lifetime, right? And how much time has passed since they actually last interacted with you? Because there might be some factors behind that where you want to run a customer retention strategy, because typically customers purchase every 8 to 12 months, but it's been 14 and you haven't heard from Kyle lately. That might be a new level of emphasis or intelligence that you might not have today. But to help give companies confidence in this math and to see these insights, there's a data prep report to let you know how clean and organized your existing data already is. Because if you have messy or disorganized or partial copies of data, the insights aren't going to be very accurate. Dirty data in gives dirty data out. So through this data report, we're able to give you the suggestions of where do we see data missing. Which field values do you actually want to go out and search for? So you're not looking for the needle in the haystack. We're giving you a prioritized suggestion of what data should you go out and capture at which data source to help fill in those gaps. And one of my favorite things about a customer data platform is the ability to take the human bias out of the persona building and segment creation. We've all had our opinions of this criteria of people as our best customer base, but is it actually? Is there data to back up that assumption is the correct assumption? So I genuinely appreciate that suggested segments have the ability in Dynamics 365 customer insights data. I know, I'm sorry, we're making this a mouthful these days, huh? But it helps you expand your thinking and provide another angle of what might be worth pursuing for an upcoming campaign, but also help find underserviced customers that I can interact with. More like a proactive retention strategy. For example, I wanted to see why one of these suggestions was provided to me. And Customer Insights gave me an explanation and summary as to why it might be worthwhile. And you might be thinking, great, you found a group of people to interact with, Kyle, and be intentional with, but now what? What do we do with them? That's where you can export these groupings of individuals into a system of engagement, like advertising campaigns with Adobe, AdRoll, Facebook, Google, Bing, Snapchat, LinkedIn, or even LiveRamp, or into marketing automation platforms for email and SMS marketing like Customer Insights Journeys, Constant Contact, or Breaks. Partially feels goofy to me to say non-Microsoft created technologies for system of records, right? But the reason I do is that customer insights data can be used with both existing Dynamics 365 customers and organizations that don't have any Dynamics apps yet. For example, organizations have data stored in various locations, but to get the insights, but they still want to create those personas, segments, and get these kinds of insights, but they want to export it back into their existing tools. And honestly, that's totally fine by me. And I get it. You might have just signed a 3-year contract with HubSpot, and you can't justify adopting a new Microsoft-based marketing automation platform. That's fine. Get started with our insights capabilities and slowly start testing out your email capabilities for the time being. But there is a lot of value of using customer insights data to enhance the data already within Dataverse and the existing technologies that are sitting outside of it. You can still apply insights and build personas and segments, and you can use that new level of intelligence and insights in your day-to-day interactions with a customer. And you can also export those insights to other applications if you wanted to, right? Now, this next slide might be a little in the weeds for some folks in the audience, but I know there's some of you out there that are starting to wonder, where is this data actually in Dataverse, and how can you get it, access to it? So I've included a couple blue boxes to highlight up across the top of where in Dataverse these insights can actually be found. But the main point that I want to highlight is that this always comes back to the contact, that individual person. And that individual person is already being used as the central place to store and relate data to, and is ultimately where that 360-degree view is really coming to life. It all comes back to knowing the human in the middle. You're going to get additional insights, additional fields, additional intelligence added and built upon this individual that can influence a relevant, personalized experience, but it's still, again, building upon. You already have a lot of the foundation already there. Because you already have Dynamics 365, maybe you have a contact record, maybe you have it for customer service or for sales. You already laid the foundations. You already have the core data already established. Now let's build upon that by augmenting and enhancing that contact with new levels of intelligence with a CDP. But we also have to remember that there's a 360-degree view of each and every contact in your database. And each one of them is fairly unique, but also fairly similar to others. Kind of a look-alike situation. And organizations should find a way to group these individuals together and essentially tag them in a way that when you start to reach out at scale to interact with these individuals, you're able to provide a scalable way of sending relevant images, relevant word choices, relevant industry content, or inviting them to relevant events. Because this is really how you start to personalize each of those interactions. For example, marketing teams can start to reward loyal customers, but also reach out to folks who might be at risk, due to the lack of engagement. It's more of a retention strategy, right? Sales teams are more informed when walking into a meeting with a customer, and they can truly act as those active advisors because they can show the customer that they know them. Service teams can not only prioritize responses for highly regarded or status customers with prioritized queues and SLAs, but you can also use these insights to identify at-risk customers and prioritize their interactions with better queues and SLAs as an attempt at a retention strategy. If they're having continued poor CSAT, customer satisfaction ratings, maybe you want to bump them up into a queue and provide more timely responses, and that helps increase the CSAT. All of this to say that relevant and personalized experiences aren't delivered in pockets or one-off scenarios. It's a cross-team effort, and a 360-degree view to you might differ than a 360-degree view to me, or to Contosa Products, or to Lamana Healthcare, or Woodgrove Bank. But you might be closer to having a 360-degree view than you might think. Thank you for joining me on my exploration of that elusive 360-degree view. What is it anyway? Thank you.
Hey, Kyle.
How's it going, Ryan?
Wow. Yeah, that awesome. There was a great presentation, first of all, and seriously, like I work in the government space, and you happen to work in multiple other spaces and industries as well. So as we think about like what's important and what is really kind of standing out, I want to go back to something that you said at the very very beginning, and it was that sticky note on your desk. Like customer expectations continue to increase, but their patience continue to decrease. I would even argue that we're losing their attention span on top of it too. I mean, I look at my kids and what they're paying attention to, what they're ignoring, and things like that. What are some of your thoughts about when you're trying to get that 360? How are we also catering it now to this next generation of people kind of coming in as well?
Yeah, it's a really interesting journey in my mind because you never know where they're starting. Like with cookies being on mobile devices and into web browsers, but then also if you have a bank where you have a storefront, how do you actually capture those interactions so you can piece that all together to know, hey, Kyle's interacted with you 13 times in the last 12 days. He's probably pretty frustrated, or he's trying to do something new. And there's some inference that happens with that, right? But I don't know, I think it's really a cross-team effort to understand how do we interact with these people? How do we interact with each of our customers? And what was that experience like? Because if we're willing to share those kinds of information, like the appointment details, I went into the bank. I wanted to understand what does the investment strategies look like for me in a new 401k or opening an IRA for my spouse. Like those kinds of insights from the banker could be huge for the marketing department to start informing me, hey, these are what we offer. This is our value differentiation, or here's how you can get more value out of the products and services you already have with our bank. Like, there's just a lot of ways that you can engage by just such a small little detail of Kyle walked into a bank.
No, and I love that part too. And in towards the end of the presentation, you said something that really kind of stuck out to me because a 360 view might differ, from you to me, right? Can you explain more of your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I I think it's a moving goalpost because I've never seen a checklist that can go out and say, yes, I've completed the 92 different data points. This is a master data management, or this is a full 360-degree view. But I think the underlying theme is that each of our coworkers want to have a way to feel like they have access to the data that they're imagining at their head, like in their heads, but at their fingertips. So if somebody walks in and they say, oh, Kyle was asking about an IRA, or hey, I've had an issue with my water and utilities bill, that way, as the next frontline individual, I have no context of what's going on, so I'm going to look you up in the CRM. And then when they look up in the CRM, they don't see anything. And I think in the last 10 years of being in the CRM realm, I've never heard two customers say, yes, this is in totality what we need for a 360-degree view, because departments and departments use the information in different ways.
Yeah. And thanks for that too. Any thoughts or opinions or recommendations? And I realize that we do work at Microsoft, but we also work with several customers as well. What are you hearing? Because I hear this all the time in government is like, okay, we do want the 360 record of a citizen, but also how do we control access to who sees what in what data? Any thoughts around some of that?
Yeah, that's always a hot button.
I know.
I personally look at it as talk to your coworkers. Like, my favorite thing of seeing this whole quest for a customer data platform and just sharing of data is that it's almost forcing you to work with and collaborate with your coworkers to be like, hey, what kind of data do you have over on this customer? Like, what are you trying to do with them? Like, oh yeah, we have this master spreadsheet. And you're like, whoa, where's this been my whole life? Like, I've been here for 6 years. I've never seen this spreadsheet in my life. Or it's a lot of times now into SharePoint lists. Oh yeah, we have a SharePoint list for all of this, and this. Like, I didn't know that existed. And so as we get into this quest of the 360 degree view, I've been really encouraged that people are starting to talk. then you get the enforcement of the IT side of, well, how do we actually enforce? And that gets into a debated topic as well. Each chief data officer or internal security officers can have what's shareable, what's permissible to be exposed, and just the proper procedures in place for it all. But I would say that if it's in something like Dataverse, whether it's in a native Dataverse table or through a virtual table that gets brought in from something like a SQL or from a Fabric or whatever that may be, you can start to apply the security rules of who can see what kind of level of access. So we're starting to help lay the foundations for it all, but there's still a human involvement of and discernment of what and how that actually gets done.
Yep. And I always look at it from an approach of like zero trust, right? Just enough information so that way people could be successful in their roles with what they do. In your example of the data points that could be used when creating a view about an individual, I saw you had some calculations at the top, like how long they've been a customer or how many policies that they've had with their agent or agencies. Can these insights be used at an account level for those B2B organizations who work with accounts rather than individual customers?
Oh, absolutely. I can actually show you an example of something that I've been working on recently.
That'd be great. And while you're bringing that up, the chat is live. This is a live chat. Big risk here, big risk. So please, if you have any questions, throw them into chat. We can surely try to address them as we go along here.
All right, so I think I might be sharing it, but who knows? We always have the flubs of what's actually being shared out in from a monitor perspective and whatnot. But in this example, I was working with an organization earlier this year that wanted to see all that data rolled up, that they wanted to understand what is the account lifetime value based on all the individuals that they knew, right, in that 360-degree view. So they could rate things like the engagement score, how frequently are they interacting with us based on a benchmark of maybe like 40 units or 40 engagements is considered good for the account. And then understanding what is that average churn risk per individual. Because if Kyle's highly engaged with our brand and our products and services, he's not likely to churn. But if he's one person out of 100 employees that are affiliated with this organization, and 99 of them aren't engaged at all, there's a high likelihood that this account is going to churn. So as an account manager, I can then start to reach out proactively to understand, hey, your level of engagement's been pretty low over the past, time period. How can we work on that ahead of the renewal? So it's not like the week of, hey, give me the contract, or why don't you sign the contract to extend services? Like that sales rep isn't blindsided that, oh no, we're not going to move forward with you because we didn't use your services. So it's like a way to get more proactive with their account managers. But they also ran it in parallel with the marketing team to say, hey, we're going to market a value enhancement campaign to each of the individuals so that they can understand what are the benefits of using the services that are available to them. I know internally we have a couple like health-related resources that we might get an email once a month saying, hey, have you thought about using it in this way? Hey, don't forget about these benefits are going to expire. A lot of like dental companies do something like that too. Like, hey, don't forget to get your teeth cleaned because you get 2 free cleanings a year with your policy. That sort of thing. That way the marketing team can get more proactive in those retention strategies. But this organization also wanted to understand just who are those individuals that created the score, like a little bit more transparency behind it. And so we used another Power App to be able to show what are those scores for each of those individuals. Like Andrew, for example, he's not engaging at all. Like he got a 1, you got a blank in there. There's no lifetime value. But then you got Annie that has been fairly engaged. So Annie might be like a champion for your organization, like between the two brands, right? Like an internal champion. Whereas everybody else, they may not even know who you are. And so that's just another level of insights that the account managers can use for either like white spacing and like renewals and such, but also the marketing team to start messaging to the folks that don't know that they have these benefits available to them.
Right on. And I see a question that came in as well is how can we get a visual of the client center of the universe? Like And I believe I'm interpreting this correctly, is like, who are their family members? What is their circle and sphere? How do we get everybody, together? Who's at the center of a customer's universe?
Yeah.
And I think it kind of goes back to some of the relationships too, is, what are we tracking and what do we know?
Very true. Because it's blurring the lines of like first party data of what do we have already in the CRM? What do we already have in an Excel spreadsheet because of the interactions that we've had with one of the people like in a household, for example. But then you get into the realm of like working with data brokers to buy third party data. So how can you understand, like if you do a Google or a Bing search of your own name, a lot of times you see like family members associated with from some sketchy looking website, right? So somehow they have a data graph of who is related to this person or who's likely to be related to this person based on public records. And organizations are starting to buy that data and start to merge it in and start to say, okay, we know Kyle, but we don't know their spouse. Cool, we're going to go out, buy third-party data, do some matching to understand things like the address. So if somebody has a common address and the same last name, it's pretty likely that they're a family member, and you can bring them together into that 360 view of like related family members. So it gets a little messy sometimes because I didn't opt in to share my spouse's information with your brand. So there's that fine line of be cool, not creepy when it comes to data like that. Because if you're too relevant and I didn't tell you anything about my partner, it's gonna weird me out when all of a sudden you start talking about their work, employment history, and their income and all these other stuff, like they could get from a DMB or from an Experian or something like that.
Yeah, and I think of all the stuff like if I did a Bing search of Ryan Dorheim, and I've recently done this too as well for a completely different conversation. But I mean, you'll see me dancing in front of a police motorcycle to Taylor Swift. You'll see me giving some safety presentation, and also perhaps even some things with Bobby Small from Dynamics User Group. So I mean, it's like there's such a wide variance of how we're connected, and what we chose to put out there in the world to see. But all of that is, I think, defining some of those relationships of what is in the center of my universe. So I love that as well. I was kind of just thinking as we're going through this as well. In your presentation, you kind of had a back and forth of a customer saying, "Hey, I need that 360 view," and then you have like you or me or perhaps another salesperson or vendor saying like, "Okay, what kind of data do you want to bring together?" And that kind of leads out is, what we understand with Dynamics 365, customer insights, data, and things like that. We kind of get into the what can bring this all together. But what are some of your thoughts of getting to the customer's why? Why are we looking at this particular data? What outcomes are you trying to accomplish? Any thoughts on how we bridge some of those conversations between what a customer is trying to accomplish versus what the technology can bring to the table to get to their outcomes?
Oh, it's a really good question. For so long, there's been inferences by humans to understand what is the correlation of activities to an outcome. Like maybe somebody went to a website 14 times and it resulted in a sales transaction. Or maybe they were a lead 22 times because they attended different trade shows. And you finally got a sale 4 years after the fact because you've been brokering that relationship because of the different trade shows and stuff. Like there's a lot of data to synthesize through in an example like that. And we can still do those kinds of things, right? Because Dataverse is collecting or is often collecting a lot of that data because of importing leads. So salespeople can follow up with them, scanning the business cards, and they're sending out the emails or making the phone calls. But we're starting to make this pivot of bringing AI to the mix. So you could do something like Azure AI Studio with the machine learning to help you do that synthesis in a much quicker way. Plus also take out some of the human bias in it, because I might infer, cool, based on 15 years of experience of going to this trade show, this is going to be the best one because we get the most leads from it. We get the most sales from it. This is worth investing into. it might actually not. Like, it might have been dropping off over time. So people have been starting to visualize with Power BI to see that kind of stuff. But then they're starting to do or try to theorize based on the data that they've captured in the past, start to theorize and predict the future. And we're finally getting there with Azure AI Studio to help organizations do that without a super code heavy way. Because data scientists
Yeah.
are awesome, but they're a tough resource to get a hold of, right? Not to knock down, but just to be able to focus on your initiative and your quest. And so I think we're making a lot of progress there to help democratize all of that.
And I like the transparency, responsibility, and even removal the bias part of all of that. So I appreciate that. Also, it comes in from the same writer in our chat as well as I guess to their above question. If the data is already in the CRM, how can it be best shown in a visual sense, or even with what you're sharing on the screen now? Is there some type of org chart? Now, I know the answer to that because we've worked in Dynamics a long time, and I look at a contact view, and can you have some form of visual representation of an org chart of who's related to who? But is there anything you would want to add beyond that as well?
Yeah. I always start with the org chart just because it's the most, I think, the easiest to get started with, because in our new experience of doing org charts, you can assign labels to it. So it looks much prettier than it had in the past. So you can start to define, why is this contact related to this other individual? From a contact to contact to the account. But then maybe there's a contact that's associated to this account, to this quote, which is also to this broker over here. And you start to get into this web. And there's a really cool PCF control on the pcf.gallery website that one of our developers in the community had created that helps show that graph in a visual way, which I think is really fun because you can interact with it, you can click on it. And so it goes above and beyond the org chart, but into the connections table to understand how does this person relate to other areas. And I always like to start there. But if you have the time, the creativity, or the bandwidth to be able to create something like a Power App, you could also do something like that too. Here's the individual, here are the related contacts to them. Maybe it's the leads, the accounts, and order history. You could also visualize something like that in a Power App into the screen like this. Or maybe you're doing it through a Power BI report. We've seen a lot of organizations do that too in the past, because you can filter a Power BI report down to criteria based on the account record, to a contact, whatever that may be. So you can filter out a giant, big Power BI report into something that's relevant to like this household, something like that.
I love it. And T says, thanks, that's awesome. Another question that came in is, what is the name of that PCF control?
Oh man, that's a good one. I should have had that in my back pocket. Let's see. I know there's a filter up at the top when you get to PCF. I think it's pcf.gallery is the actual URL. You scroll down for a while, and then it'll be a grayish gradient control. So it'll have a picture of it, and then it's got a bunch of webs, like a spider web. And then I think there's a little person in the middle of it. So I can't think of what the name is, but I'll try to find it and throw it into the chat window after my session.
Thank you. Appreciate that. There was you said it earlier, and I want to bring context back to it as well. And it was right around the mindset of being intentional. So as you're being intentional with the people you reach out to, because I think my kids are the same way, but I'm the same way. If I see something that pops up on my phone, and if I don't know who the caller, what do I do with it? Send it to voicemail. If I don't want any more of those text messages, what do I do? Report as junk. Same thing with email. So really starts building the framework of how can we interact and engage with other people so that they'll tolerate us, but also that we're meeting them where they want to be. And from my understanding, there's some machine learning too and I realize we're talking about the customer insights data here, but is there something also on that journey side of the house too that could be of help as we're trying to be intentional?
Absolutely. So my brain goes in two different ways. The first one is enforcing that consent. Like, which one did Kyle opt into? from a consent management standpoint. So we have the landing pages. I think we call them subscription centers, or maybe it's a preference center now as we switch from outbound marketing to real-time marketing. But I can go to a landing page and opt in and opt out for different topics, like a means of communication. So which channels do I want to engage on? But also the kinds of content, like based on the topics. So if it's promotional content, like, hey, check out this upcoming deal or check out this upcoming service, like a true marketing promotional email, I can opt in and opt out of those based on the topic types. So organizations can control, oh, this is for financial services. Kyle wants to see those, but he doesn't want to see anything about home remodeling. He only wants to see about investing services, but not for like a 403B for child education savings, right? So there's some options there of just opting in and opting out of different content types. But meeting on the actual channel for engagement, like you were mentioning, you could absolutely do that in Customer Insights Journeys, our marketing automation platform, because the channel optimization side. You can add in a tile, so when somebody meets the next step in those digital touchpoints, the message gets sent out on the channel that they typically engage on. We're working on the timing of when the message actually gets sent based on open rate histories and stuff. But at the moment, Kyle's opened 14 text messages with your brand and done redirects. Each communication type, we're going to start first with an SMS. Then we'll send an email secondarily if he doesn't open that, and vice versa, right? If you continue, because I typically do, a report chunk to text messages. And so that way, the marketing engine, we're not going to like allow your reputation to get tarnished because of the continued report as junk and whatnot, or report as spam. So we're just going to start by sending Kyle the email first. And then you could start to experiment and say, hey, in the email body, would you like to engage with SMS? Click this button here to opt in. And then that way you're getting that first party consent of which communication types and when do you want to start engaging there.
And I like how it goes back to being intentional. And we might joke that you and I, hit junk or do other things, but I think the reality part is we're all very busy. We're all connected to our devices. We're all, connected in some way, but we each have our individual preferences on how we choose to interact. So to hear that, Dynamics 365's Customer Insights Journeys can actually adapt to what an individual, wants in a way they want to be communicated with, that's pretty amazing. But that also now ties something back to of like, hey, not only are we going to be marketing and are we going to be doing other things here, but how does that impact like store planning? And do you have some thought processes around, like, okay, so we're doing all of this other things, but as I get back to that B2B topic, how do we, start doing some of the store planning and, because all of this has a ripple impact of how it kind of spreads out.
Oh, exactly. Like to think of all the building leases that organizations have these days. Like people aren't always returning back into the office. How do you prioritize store locations if you're in retail, or like maybe financial banking locations, or if you're into like the state and local government? Where should different county resources be based on people that typically use them? And I started to see organizations use it in like a Power BI report where they can start to visualize, hey, because we know who these individuals are, maybe it's based on zip code, maybe it's based on their engagement values, some of those measures and KPIs, where should we prioritize those efforts? Where should we start to look for leases, or which bank locations could we close because they opt to be digital in that region? Or maybe from an optics standpoint, you can't close the St. Paul location because 40% of your customers are located in that region. Even if they are maybe lower in terms of sales, we can't get rid of it because of the concentration of our customers. And so Power BI can be a really powerful way to visualize and interact and do some hypotheses and theorizing there too.
And this is life unscripted. I absolutely love this because as you were talking, it's not just like store planning, right? It is literally resource planning because like you spoke to my heart of like, hey, state and local government and things like that. If we were to get into I'm going to knock on wood here, another global pandemic or something else where
Don't jinx us, man. Come on.
hey, I'm not trying to. But if how do we start planning and knowing the where that we can best serve citizens? This can actually be a tool for some of that too, as we look at some of these insights.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you can even think on the public side of airport planning. If you had a bunch of logistical sites, maybe because in this region we have a lot of farmers in the North Dakota and Minnesota region. Where do you get private airports? Like, where should you prioritize some of those? Because maybe they're using up Fargo too often and it's slowing down the commercial flights. Or maybe like the flight path now for global logistics, I think Alaska is getting pretty dang close to Atlanta for being one of the busiest airports. And there's hardly any humans that pass through Alaska, in comparison to Atlanta, but the number of flights, they're like the distribution hub of the planet, or North American continent, sorry. So like, how can you start to prioritize where new locations for your organization should be? Maybe based on customer count, for regions that are actually making money for your organization, where people are tending to leave from. There's just a lot of insights you could get there.
Big shout out to Atlanta. All right. I love that in the chat. I want to take that a step further too, because again, you just mentioned, North Dakota, Minnesota, snowy regions, things like that. So based off of known weather patterns, we can actually start pre-staging a lot of our state and local government equipment based off of, what could be predicted in the future. And now this can actually be a legitimate visualization. So we're letting data drive these decisions instead of just assumptions.
Exactly. And it's not like an automation of, yes, the data is always correct. We must do this decision. It's just really helping solidify and give you another outside perspective of, I have these thoughts and perspectives in my head, but is it accurate? And now there's another influential point of the data saying, yes, this is the data. We've aggregated, we've done an analysis for you, so you can take that into context when making a human decision.
Yeah. Anything else, kind of back the truck up a little bit, too, is, anything from like an account 360 perspective, any other types of visualizations or anything else, things that we haven't quite thought of yet to help provoke, because we got into the insights, being intentional. But what else are we not thinking of that, insights and data can really start doing for almost all of our customers, almost regardless of industry? I mean, especially when trying to visualize that view.
Yeah, it's a good question. One thing that might be adjacent to that is a common request I've been seeing lately is, hey, I need a customer data platform so I can understand what a customer purchased at the account. Like, show me all of the purchases affiliated with this organization. So it's not just the one individual, but the company as a whole. And I think there's an actual easy way to do it in Dynamics 365. It's not totally CID related because it's just transactional records, but I think it's a data point that a lot of people want to create as part of that, relevant data set. And I think it's easy to create something like this because you're just creating an account or a table in Dataverse. Maybe you're calling it account products, and you're relating the account table with the products so it can populate things like pricing. And it's just acting as a landing zone to just. Sorry, I don't know what's going on with this headset. We almost did it without a flub. We almost did it.
I think as we're, and I think as we're getting close to the end here, if there was two main key takeaways that you want your audience to hear and understand from your presentation today, what do you think those two key takeaways would be?
One, I think you're closer than you think in getting a 360-degree view. It's just a matter of how and where do you want to interact with it. Is it at the individual level? Is it at the organizational level? And where can that source of truth be? Like, from a data integrity standpoint, could be in a data lake. That's totally fine. But somebody on the front line isn't going to log into a data lake to see the data. So like, where can you bring that and expose to individuals in the company? And I think Dynamics 365 is a really, really easy way to do that, just at something like the contact or the account level. The second one is you don't need a CDP to create a view of a customer, because if you know who they are and what their activities are, and there's some sort of common denominator like an email address or a phone number or a physical mailing address, you could start to stitch those together through like a normal integration tool or like a lookup of the Power Automate flow, that there's orchestration ways to do it. So I don't think you have to buy a CDP right away to bring data together. I think there's other thoughtful approaches too.
Yeah. And the biggest key takeaway we wrap, we do have to hand it back to our producers, but join Doug. It's literally about user groups and communicating with one another to achieve more. So thank you so much, Kyle. Awesome job, man.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate the time.